Hello there. My name is Jonathan Friedman, and you're listening to FAQs by EHN Canada. This is the show where we scour the internet for the most frequently asked questions about mental health and addiction and ask an expert for their answers to them. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest, Sydney Marcoux. Sydney Marcoux is the Clinical Director of Victim Services of Durham Region, bringing with her a wealth of experience and a passion for serving Durham Region. With a master's degree in social work, Sydney has developed her skill set through various roles in both community and private practice settings, including hospital based and community justice environments. Sydney's approach is deeply rooted in trauma informed and anti oppressive practices, ensuring that all individuals receive support in a safe and empowering manner. As a leader within the VSDR team, she provides guidance and expertise in frontline areas such as intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking. Sydney, how are you doing today?
Hi. Yeah, great. Thanks. And how are you?
Everything is great. I'm so excited to have you on the show. I feel this is a topic that is not covered nearly enough. And I'm really excited that we get to cover it together on the show and to have you here to lead the conversation with us.
Absolutely. I appreciate you identifying that gap and always happy to share any information with the public.
Amazing. So before we get into our sort of five big questions today, I always like asking people in this space. You could have you're smart, you're intelligent, you could have chosen any field in the world. How did you get into this mental health care space?
Question. And it's funny, you don't reflect on it often enough of your path and how it leads you to where you are. But as mentioned in my bio, I spent many years in a hospital setting providing social work services and supports to patients. In one of those settings was actually in our local hospital's emergency department. And this is all at the time of COVID, where we're seeing, fear amongst patients just for their general safety within the emergency room for their health needs. But along with that actually came what we noticed as a social work team was an increase in isolation and what that leads to in terms of victimization of individuals who then have to access medical care services. So I got to know the gender-based violence sector in a roundabout way, mixed with my healthcare setting background. And then through the pandemic, I started working as a clinician, as well, providing therapeutic services. And I was like, wow, the overlap between kind of again, COVID and isolation, addressing mental health supports through my own practice, and then also seeing it in my frontline work at the hospital. I was like, I think there's more that needs to be done. And I felt that calling to look for a way that I could be more involved. And the timing, sometimes timing just works out, and the role at Victim Services became available, and I'm able to provide guidance and support to my now team of frontline staff who directly work with those who are impacted by violence.
That's amazing. Well, ahead of the interview, I appreciate the work that you do, and that's super amazing. I think that sometimes you're doing your thing, and then it clicks that there's something else that or something more specific that you need to be doing, and it sounds like it's working out for you.
Absolutely.
Amazing. So, Sydney, today we're going to get down to the nitty gritty. We're going to get into the internet's biggest questions around gender based violence. And our first question is, what exactly is gender based violence? How does it differ from other forms of violence or abuse?
Yeah, absolutely. The way that we, I guess, define gender based violence is harmful acts towards individuals based on their gender identity, or gender roles. Obviously, disproportionately affecting women, children, young girls, LGBTQ plus individuals, and folks who may identify or present female. And with that, we know that these are acts that are based within our inequities within our systems. So somebody is being directly victimized based on the way that they show up, based on the way that they present. And we see this most often within intimate relationships, where there's two parties, and we see, a whole variety of different forms of abuse, but similar to what I think individuals would think of being harmful. So obviously physical abuse, but there's also the emotional side, the psychological, the financial. There's a list of different ways that we see this present and disproportionately affect women and girls.
It's really interesting. And this isn't one of the official questions,
Yeah.
but in my mind, when I'm thinking about this, no, I imagine some relationships, but most relationships that I can think of don't start out where there's that abuse happening or going on, whether it be it physical, financial, psychological, emotional, sexual. Like, what happens between the start of a relationship and the abuse? Like, what happens in between? Like, where does that cycle come from?
Yeah, I love this question. I am going to give my clinical response following this kind of story that I heard. So, at Victim Services of Durham Region, we work with survivors. So, we're survivor-led or survivor-centric, which it just ensures that the voice of the survivor and the programming that we have to support individuals is based on their experience and in building best practices. And we have had the privilege of working with a survivor who described it as, and I'll never forget it, and the way that it sat with me, I think others will appreciate this, is because people would ask her all the time, like, how did this happen? How didn't you identify that the violence was taking place, and why didn't you leave? We hear that all the time. Why don't you just leave? And she used this incredible analogy or metaphor, and she said, if you put a frog into a pot of water that's cool, and you start to boil it, right? And you do it very slowly. The frog doesn't actually identify that the water gets to a place of boiling and unfortunately passes due to obviously, burning to death. Whereas if you were to put a pot on your stove and the water is already boiling, right, and you place the frog inside, it would jump out. And what this analogy or metaphor sort of explains is exactly what you're asking. Like, it doesn't usually start with this, aggressive or intimidating individual who has outbursts of anger or action against somebody, their partner. They're slow building. And you often will hear our survivors say it starts with threats, or it starts with intimidation, or it starts with, isolation, excluding people from their friends and families, almost to gain that control. But it happens ever so slowly that you almost don't recognizing that it happens until you're now experiencing, you know, maybe what we consider to be more direct forms of violence, where they are perhaps leaving physical marks or assaulting their partner. So I hope that makes sense, where we see the cycle of violence starting from a place of calm, and it slowly builds. And what we also know from perpetrators or abusers is that they're really good at sucking you back in, right? Like having that outburst that we may see throughout that cycle of violence, but then they are incredible at apologizing or doing acts to make that person feel loved or cared for again, out promising, oh my God, we hear it all the time, I promise I'll never do this again, and here's why I acted in that way. But again, we do see that cycle repeats itself and often escalates in the type of violence that the individual experiences.
Yeah, there's kind of like at the beginning, you take the time to have some relationship, some attachment, the
Yeah,
water heats up,
yeah.
and then over time, this abuse is happening. But then it sounds like the perpetrator will often lean back on the relationship and apologize. We've come so far. Let's not ruin
Mm-hmm.
it now. Uh,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah. They also do a really good job of creating dependency, right? And that form of isolating someone from their friends or their families, maybe financially isolating them. We see it often with individuals with children who are now dependent on that partner to care for them financially or to provide them with somewhere to live. So there's so many contributing factors, but certainly, as you mentioned earlier, it doesn't often start in that heat of violence, because I think that would address red flags from the beginning.
so we're gonna go off. We're gonna go off order here,
Do it.
but
Yeah.
talking about red flags, there's this quote from the show I love, and it's kind of an odd one, BoJack Horseman, and one of the quotes from the show is, "When you're wearing rose-colored glasses, all the red flags just look like flags," and it's something that always comes to mind in this sort of discussion. So, what are the early signs? What are those early first rose red flags that somebody might be experiencing? We'll get into support after, but what are the things we should start to notice?
Yeah. I think it's different for everyone. However, on a general level, I would say anytime that there's that control aspect where your partner is dictating what you can and can't do, who you can and can't see, what you can and cannot spend money on. Um, we know from working with survivors that it's that how can I create an environment where that person is dependent on me. So if you start to have start to notice that, you're like, oh, and again, it may not. Again, we often hear that ourselves that our survivors don't notice that in the beginning. They may hear that from their employers, their friends and family, their communities who are recognizing this almost newly found isolation away from other people. So I would say that that's definitely a large one. I would also say, as mentioned before, like that cycle of violence where it's blow up and then how can I now make up for the actions that I've done? I'm going to make excuses for the reason that I acted this way. I'm actually going to blame you. It's your fault that I reacted in the way that I did that was intimidating or fear mongering for that victim. And then really quickly change my tune and apologize and provide them with that love and support that they probably had in the beginning of that relationship. And we see that go on and on. And again, as mentioned, like it does tend to increase with the severity of those blow-ups. So those are also those red flags that I would say. And honestly, lack of trust when you're out and you've never given your partner a reason to not trust you. We hear that often as well. Again, it's that control, that power that they want to have over their partner. Those would be some of those big ones, certainly that we see. And the power and control wheel is an incredible tool sometimes to use with individuals who may not even recognize that this is that some of these maybe are coming up within their relationship, these red flags. So things like using your children against you, right? Like you can't go anywhere. We have children together. And you're not going to break up our family for the children, right? So all of these ways to keep that person, you know, controlled would be those red flags in the beginning.
So, isolation being sort of over time as a result of this relationship, you're finding yourself removed from family or friends. You're not going out as often with them. Maybe at work, you're more removed and quiet and less engaged.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And
Maybe you're
then,
not doing the things that you once enjoyed doing. Maybe, you would go out for long walks to just enjoy nature and now you're not doing that as often because you feel this sense to need to spend time with that partner and they really do an incredible job of pulling people away from things that they once enjoyed.
so let's talk a bit about, let's shift from sort of during the relationship to after that relationship. I imagine trauma is a really big piece of the puzzle here. And maybe somebody's in the process of escaping that abusive relationship. Maybe it's later on. How does that trauma from that violence affect someone's long term emotional, psychological, social well being?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's post-traumatic stress symptoms, right? If even if somebody doesn't have that diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, the symptoms certainly present. It may affect somebody's ability to connect with relationships in the future, not having that trust, being fearful of what somebody's response is going to be within a relationship. We often see that, but we actually often see as well entering new relationships where abuse may be present again, right? We like I said earlier with that analogy, like you almost become used to somebody controlling your actions, controlling your behaviors, or having sudden outbursts, or screaming or yelling becomes normalized within the relationship. So and that obviously impacts somebody's self-esteem, somebody's self-worth, somebody's ability to get up in the morning and be productive with their day. We see, a lot more cases of anxiety or depression following these intimate partner violence relationships. So it definitely presents in so many ways, but directly impacting, somebody's ability to do and live daily life without that following. We also know from research is that offering somebody support or resources sooner than later can help to reduce those symptoms. So, and I'm sure we'll get into that, in our discussion around what supports are available to individuals, but the importance behind making those connections and building a support system around somebody can drastically reduce the post-traumatic stress symptoms.
Yeah, I feel like when it comes to support, a lot of times like we want to seek support when we're in that moment of crisis. But if this is something that you've experienced, we've been accessing support, knowing that you have that safe place to come to again and again, because it takes time to learn to have a healthy relationship. It's a skill
Yeah.
all in its own, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that um, it takes multiple attempts often to leave a violent relationship or an abusive partnership. We will see often individuals that we work with, survivors that we work with, looking to try to leave 7, 8, 9 times before being able to successfully exit that situation and start to rebuild and look into what healthy relationships can be for them.
So when you're in a relationship and you're starting to notice the isolation, maybe a lack of trust, a power imbalance, dependence,
Mm-hmm.
that's a that's something to notice in the relationship. But maybe when you're dating,
Hmm.
are there things that we can start to notice? Like we've we've been through the cycle. We're that person who struggled 7, 8, 9 times to leave. We're exploring new relationships. What are the things we can look for in in dating in a new partner that might be healthier? What
Yeah.
can we notice?
I would say it's about those trusted people in your life that you may have, and especially coming out of a relationship where there was violence or there was, um, you know, again, all of the things we've been talking about, but hopefully you've been connected and you have those safe and trusted people who maybe saw you through the previous relationship that you were in. And we'd say to encourage continuously having conversations, right? Here's what's going on in my relationship. Here's what I'm noticing now. Is this safe for me? And having that person that you can go to have them sort of weigh in, and whether that's a friend or a family member, whether that's a professional or a clinician that maybe you had access to, or maybe it's a service like victim services where you're like, this is what I previously experienced, here's what I'm experiencing now, and getting that third party feedback can be really helpful. But I would say it's about remaining connected to resources, right? Like we talked about how it can be a part of your journey for quite some time, and into healing and into learning about healthy relationships. But being able to continuously work on that self-esteem aspect, or continuously make sure that your anxiety and depression or any symptoms that you've experienced due to the relationship are continuously being supported or managed, can help with having more insight into what you're experiencing when you start dating again.
So not just like learning how to access that support at all stages of those relationships, checking, is this a safe place for me to be in? Here are the things that I'm interested in. Is that a flag I should be looking at more deeply,
Yeah,
perhaps?
exactly. Remaining engaged, I think, is critical as you begin to start, new romantic relationships.
Totally. So um, I want to get into the specific support structures that exist and like how victim services works, how to engage with that. But before we get there, I just want to talk briefly about stigma. I think in every podcast episode we've had about any of the topics we've spoken about, there's some big chunk of stigma that exists, and I can imagine that this is no exception.
No,
So,
no, I think you're right.
what role does shame or stigma play in raising your hand and asking for support when you're experiencing gender-based violence?
Yeah, great question, and you're absolutely right on the money when we talk about how stigma impacts somebody's comfortability around accessing supports or accessing resources in the community. So I think the first one is almost self-blame. It's my fault. I made our relationship this way. I've made mistakes within our relationship. I've done this to myself. Is something that we hear often, right? Is that self-blaming piece, and then in addition to that, it's not being believed, right? So again, not all of the violence is physical, right? We see violence present in so many ways. So when it's not something that it can be seen to the eye, it becomes, well, is it really that bad? Is this really happening to you? So this idea around, am I even going to be believed? And we specifically see that through our criminal justice system, right? Where perhaps police were called to an evening where you and your partner are experiencing a violent episode, and again, not physical violence, but perhaps that coercion, that manipulation, that threats, all of those pieces. when it's he said, she said, and an investigation takes place and charges aren't laid, what does that say to a victim? We didn't believe you, right? And a part of my job here at Victim Services is to work with our local police department to teach them, about language and the importance of saying it's not that we don't believe you. Here's why we're not able to press criminal charges. Here's support as a victim, which is we like survivor in our language that we speak, but from the policing perspective, here's still services and supports that you're entitled to as a victim, even if that charge has not been laid. And then furthermore, as you talk about, okay, that's just that initial piece of like calling police. Hypothetically, this does then go to a place where charges are laid, and we see it throughout our criminal justice system. The likelihood of the charges sticking, or that individual, there's again, my brain's going in a million different directions as to how this impacts people, but it's that believability piece that victims often or survivors say to us, I don't want to go through that. I don't want to go through that process, right, and be questioned on the trauma that I've experienced. So I would say that's one piece. But we also definitely see that stigma related to cultural norms, and different organizations that we work with. I've had the opportunity, the privilege to go in and to speak to newcomers who are coming to Canada and talk about what healthy relationships look like. What are your rights as an individual here in Canada? What supports can you access within the community who are going to understand or guide or be culturally appropriate or sensitive to the needs that you have, right? And so there's certainly that piece. Also, if somebody's in a position of power, right? So not only are you in a position of power within your relationship, just having that power imbalance or dynamic, we also see it from individuals who maybe their partner is a lawyer, their partner is, a successful business person, right? Like all of these elements that go, oh, really? Like, is he really doing this to you? Or are you really experiencing these forms of violence? And not having the resources to be able to stand up to that person who's in that position of power. So I hope that answers the question, but definitely we see stigma present in almost every element of every intimate partner violence case that we support here.
So many layers to that.
Yeah.
I guess we'll get into the specific support systems that exist in just a second, but if somebody is having those thoughts going through their head, if they're hearing, if they're in this situation, if they're experiencing violence, and maybe their partner is like a politician or a community member, what's your message to them? What should their first step be to accessing support?
Yeah. So difficult to answer. I would say knowledge. We always say knowledge is power, right? So being able to understand what's available to you within your community that you can access. And I think that's what makes victim services unique, is that we don't require an individual to work with police or to provide a statement to police or have any involvement with law enforcement where they're reporting this. They can come to us, and we can provide that anonymous and confidential support. So we can help you to navigate systems, help you to connect to resources, and connect you with publicly funded support, so that even if those finances are restricted from you, that you're not receiving the support that is so required to help you to put wheels into motion and to look at next steps for your relationship. So I would say it's about talking. It's about, again, those trusted, safe people, and it's about building connections, in a way that's safe for you to do so as you navigate that.
So we've been talking about, having the supports around us. I imagine that there's some professional supports, there's some non-professional supports that we can start to access. But what are these safe spaces that we should start to explore perhaps more deeply?
Yeah, great question. So I think I'm biased, but I think starting with your local victim service agency. So each region, I can speak to Ontario context, but has a victim service organization. And again, our services are free, they're confidential, and we don't require you to work with police. And what we can help with is system navigation and needs-based assessment. So again, everybody who's accessing supports, their needs may look entirely different from one person to the next. So we come at it from a framework of, what does this person need to feel supported in the moment, right? That crisis-based support. So whether that's helping them to access safe accommodation, whether that's actually safety planning within the home that you're living with your partner. Maybe it's helping them to navigate legal supports from that environment. If it's not, are we looking at emergency shelter options? Are we looking to provide you with resources to have your basic needs met, and or food or clothing on your back? Like, it's a whole, again, array sort of supports and services. But I think what makes victim services unique is that we are kind of that central piece along with the client. We never do the work for our clients. We're always walking alongside them, but we can then help to make those connections to other resources within the community, right? So accommodation, legal supports, financial supports, and really just, again, speaking to the unique needs of that person who's coming to us for help.
Yeah, one size doesn't fit all. Everyone has their own situation, and it sounds like victim services is the place to go to sort of like assess what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
hear you out in a safe place, and help right then and there, but also with the broader service spectrum in Ontario or in that local province, to access all of those different services, be it something like safety planning,
Mm-hmm.
or accommodations, clothing, other more tangible supports.
Yeah, absolutely. And we try, not try, we do come at it from that place that is trauma informed, right? That no one experience is the same as the next. Giving control back to the victim or to the survivor is incredibly important so that they can make informed decisions. I think also, though, in addition to that, is that we work really hard to recognize we can't do everything. We need to rely on our partners within the community. And we are continuously looking for ways to fill gaps. So making a connection with our Indigenous-based organizations, if we have a victim who's presenting to us and would feel most supported by an organization who can provide that cultural context, we are always looking for ways in which to be able to do that, so that the care that we're providing is specialized to the individual.
Great. And let's talk for a second about non-professional supports. Let's say I'm a family member. I notice
Mm.
my sibling or somebody is going through this situation, or I have a hunch.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how can I be the most supportive to my sibling in this case?
Mm-hmm. It's a tough question. But what I'll say is, again, we're not looking to point fingers, point blame, or even say directly in the beginning, I think this is what you're experiencing and here's what I've seen. Sometimes what I'll suggest to family members is to bring up an example of somebody else that maybe you have a shared relationship with, and whether or not this is a falsified story, but identify what it is that they're experiencing, so that the person who's listening to that story can kind of go, "Oh, wow, my sibling is perturbed by the experience of our ex neighbor who appears to be in a intimate partner violence relationship," or and then maybe allow them to sort of hear it softly and maybe indirectly. And if that doesn't work, I think eventually you get to a place where those important conversations, again, in a place of safety, right? We always have to consider where we're having these conversations, the approach that we're taking, but to come at it from, we love you so much and we care so much about you. Here's what is available. Maybe you've done a little bit of research within your community. Maybe you just encourage that first phone call to a professional organization for help. It's all about sort of just having conversations. We know that from abusers, they thrive in isolation. That's what they want. They want us to not have these conversations, to keep somebody in a place of being controlled. So if you start to have edge those conversations and to have them slowly, often we can see people become a little bit more receptive.
It's interesting. It's always about like creating a place of safety,
Yeah.
using storytelling and relationships as opposed to like labeling somebody as
Yeah,
the victim in this situation,
exactly.
because especially if it's something that they haven't explored yet,
Yeah.
people can become really defensive, and you could even be pushing them further away from
Mm-hmm.
accessing the support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Yeah.
Sydney, this has been absolutely fantastic. I've learned so much about this topic, and I'm sure all of our listeners have too. If you were to have one, um, you know, parting word, last piece of advice to share with the audience, maybe for those who are starting to explore
Mhm.
accessing services, what would your message to them be?
My message would be you're not alone. We know that 1 in 4 individuals at some point in their life will experience violence within their relationship. You're not experiencing this um, aside from others who may be in your life. So to have conversations, to keep your mind open to receiving support from those who care about you, and to start having conversations with your local organizations who are here and ready to support. But it's not your fault, and organizations are here and want to provide you with the support that you need at the pace that you need it.
Great. And where can people learn more about victim services? Is it just a Google search?
Yeah, absolutely. If you, again, Durham's is vsdurhamregion.com, but I think that's right anyways. I'll have to send that to you. But yeah, absolutely local, your local sort of Google Drive will come up within your area. As I mentioned, each region has a victim service organization, so encourage people to make that connection. And often they have resources built in right to their websites. I know that we do. We have some YouTube educational videos, some psychoeducation material. So all of that is on our website if you like to look into it.
Sydney, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I can't wait to talk to you again.